Friends, thank you for being here today. Listen closely to what I am about to share with you because you will not hear this on the evening news. Picture the morning of March 1st, 2026. Thick, black, suffocating smoke is choking the sky over Jebel Ali, the largest commercial port in the Middle East and the critical beating artery connecting Asian manufacturing to Western consumer markets. In this highly plausible, meticulously modeled scenario, a scenario actively being war-gamed by analysts deep within the Pentagon right now, while the mainstream media distracts you with endless, trivial political theater, the world wakes up to a fundamental, irreversible shift in global power. Make no mistake, this is not a drill. This is not an industrial accident easily swept under the rug by corporate PR firms. It is a calculated asymmetric strike designed to paralyze over 19 million container units and sever the global supply chain at its most vulnerable choke point. While the general public, completely hypnotized by the 24-hour news cycle, fixates on the spectacular Hollywood-style footage of military retaliation, intercepted missiles, and flashing anti-aircraft fire over the desert night sky, the real devastation is happening completely undetected by the average American investor. The underlying truth of this projected scenario is terrifyingly simple, yet entirely absent from the front pages of the financial press. A foreign adversary does not need to defeat the United States Navy in open combat to absolutely destroy your purchasing power. By successfully striking a commercial nervous system like Jebel Ali and broadcasting a simple, low-tech radio warning to commercial shipping, the adversary triggers an immediate, catastrophic, and cascading spike in global shipping insurance premiums. I need you to understand that this isn't a distant conflict taking place in a desert thousands of miles away. This is a direct, targeted, and lethal assault on your 401k, your pension, your life savings, and your daily cost of living. When 150 massive oil tankers sit paralyzed outside the Strait of Hormuz, holding back a full 20% of the world's daily oil supply simply out of mathematical fear, the resulting inflationary shockwave will wipe out dollar-denominated assets overnight. The financial models you rely on, the retirement calculators your broker uses, they are all predicated on an era of perfect global stability that is now dead and buried. You must stop relying on a fragile grid of digital wealth, exposed equities, and empty government promises. The time to aggressively restructure your portfolio is right now, today, before the smoke officially rises over the Persian Gulf. You must move aggressively into tangible, sovereign-free assets. Physical gold and physical silver are not just commodities in this high-stakes environment. They are your only mathematical lifeboats against a geopolitical and macroeconomic margin call of unprecedented scale. Now, to truly grasp the gravity of the trap we have walked into, we have to completely shatter a very specific illusion. It is the illusion of kinetic dominance, the fairy tale the defense establishment uses to pacify the American public. In these war game projections, the official statements from Central Command will confidently tell you that the American Armada is fully operational. The Pentagon briefings will confirm the spectacular destruction of enemy frigates at their berths. Press secretaries will proudly highlight the surgical elimination of top adversarial command structures, presenting a narrative of overwhelming, unstoppable technological superiority. But I want you to look past the press podium and understand this brutal, unvarnished reality. Winning the kinetic war, dropping multi-million-dollar munitions on aging infrastructure, means absolutely nothing if you fundamentally lose the economic war. Consider the strategic reality of what happens behind the front lines, specifically regarding vessels like the military Sea Lift Command auxiliary ships. The mainstream narrative, spoon-fed to reporters who lack even a basic understanding of military logistics, focuses entirely on our impregnable aircraft carriers. They are missing the entire point. An asymmetric adversary doesn't need to sink a multi-billion-dollar, heavily defended nuclear aircraft carrier to neutralize a strike group. They only need to threaten the slow, unarmored logistics vessels, the ships that actually carry the Tomahawk cruise missiles, the aviation fuel, and the vital spare parts. By targeting the mundane supply lines rather than the glamorous warships, they impose a massive, bleeding strategic tax on our operations. In this geopolitical projection, the adversary can afford to lose its surface navy, its nuclear enrichment sites, and its top generals in a matter of hours. To the Western mind, to the pundits on cable TV, this looks like a total crushing defeat. Yet, in the grand calculus of asymmetric warfare, they still win the day. Why? Because their objective is not conventional military victory. It is total economic paralysis. When a rogue institution or a hardened state actor has spent 4 decades meticulously preparing for the exact day it has nothing left to lose, it becomes the most dangerous force on Earth. They have entirely redefined the very concept of winning. Winning is no longer planting a flag on conquered territory. Winning is making the operational environment so uncertain, so expensive, and so incredibly volatile that the economic cost of maintaining a Western presence vastly exceeds the political benefit of the campaign. Let's strip away the military jargon for a second and look strictly at the cold, unforgiving mathematics of global trade. What we are looking at is a masterclass in anti-access and area denial, executed not with state-of-the-art hypersonic glide vehicles, but with ruthless, unstoppable commercial logic. Let us deep dive into the Strait of Hormuz. We are talking about 20% of global oil consumption passing through a waterway barely 20 miles wide at its narrowest point. But the weapon used to choke this artery isn't a minefield or a submarine wolf pack. In our scenario, an adversary simply broadcasts a single 6-word radio warning on standard open-source commercial VHF frequencies. No ship is allowed to pass. That is it. A transmission that costs less than a cup of coffee to broadcast. They do not need the actual naval capacity to physically enforce this blockade. Actuarial tables do the heavy lifting for them. Commercial tanker operators are not patriotic naval commanders willing to die for a cause. They are cold-blooded corporate entities. They calculate risk by the hour, weighing freight revenue against insurance premiums. When an oil tanker is struck and an adversary claims the entire strait is a designated kill zone, maritime insurance syndicates sitting in comfortable offices at Lloyd's of London immediately pull their coverage or hike premiums to astronomically unsustainable levels. The blockade, therefore, becomes entirely self-enforcing. 150 massive tankers drop anchor and sit idle. The global energy market seizes up like an engine drained of oil. This is maximum economic devastation achieved with absolute minimum military investment. It is the perfect weaponization of uncertainty. Uncertainty costs absolutely nothing to transmit over a radio wave, but it costs the Western world billions of dollars in lost GDP, runaway inflation, and market panic for every single day it persists. And here is exactly how this connects directly to your wallet. This disruption feeds straight into the systemic fragility of our fiat currency system. When the supply of energy, the master input for every single good and service on the planet, is restricted by a ghost blockade, prices do not just rise, they explode. The inflation you have experienced over the last few years, the inflation that has already quietly eroded the purchasing power of your savings, is merely a tremor compared to the earthquake of a sustained energy shock. The Federal Reserve can print trillions of dollars, they can manipulate interest rates, and they can tweak the yield curve all they want, but they cannot print barrels of crude oil. They cannot electronically transfer commercial shipping insurance. They are totally powerless in the face of a physical supply chain breakdown orchestrated by an adversary who understands that America's Achilles heel is not its military, but its highly leveraged, debt-soaked economy. I want you to pause right here and let me know in the comments. Do you actually believe Washington has a backup plan when these global supply lines break? Drop a yes or no down below, because I read every single one of your responses and I want to know where you stand on this. But the devastation doesn't stop at the shipping lanes. There is a secondary target here, one that is perhaps much more lethal, and the mainstream analysis is completely ignoring it. I'm talking about the political will and economic survival of our so-called allies in the region. When retaliatory missiles land on luxury resorts in Dubai or near critical air bases in Qatar and Kuwait, the intended target is not the concrete runway or the military radar dish. The target is the entire economic business model of the Gulf states. These nations have spent decades and trillions of dollars building economies totally reliant on being perceived as ultra-stable, luxurious hubs for global commerce, international transit, and high-end tourism. If hosting American forces turns their pristine commercial ports into active war zones and their skies into terrifying missile corridors, the cost-benefit analysis of that military alliance radically and violently changes. The adversary is sending a lethal, unmistakable message to the region. Hosting Western military assets will cost you your economic future. It is a psychological burden designed to fracture alliances from the inside out, forcing regional governments to second-guess every agreement they have with Washington. Imagine the sheer panic in the boardrooms of Dubai or Doha when the realization sets in that their economic lifeblood is draining away not because of a direct invasion, but because of their geopolitical associations. Every canceled flight, every diverted cargo ship, every plummeting hotel occupancy rate acts as a silent, devastating tax on their loyalty to the West. The adversary knows they cannot defeat the U.S. military head-on, so they target the hosts. They make the neighborhood too dangerous for business. And in a globalized economy, if you kill the business, you win the war. You have to ask yourself what this actually means for the global financial order as we know it. This shifting dynamic isn't just a localized conflict. It signals the rapid, violent acceleration from a unipolar world, where the U.S. dollar and U.S. military dictated the terms of global trade, to a multipolar economic war zone where adversaries use energy and logistics as bludgeons. What you are witnessing is the real-time unwinding of the petrodollar system. That system, the very foundation of American macroeconomic dominance for the last half-century, relies implicitly on the United States, providing security in exchange for energy being priced in dollars. If the U.S. can no longer guarantee that security, if an adversary can shut down the Strait of Hormuz with a VHF radio broadcast, the entire premise of the petrodollar begins to violently unravel. And when the demand for the dollar falls on the global stage, the inflation comes home to roost in your local grocery store, at your gas pump, and inside your retirement portfolio. Now, I need you to mentally zoom out from the Persian Gulf and look directly at your own hometown. Let's talk about the immediate, brutal domestic ripple effect. For decades, corporate America has worshipped at the altar of just-in-time inventory. It is an incredibly efficient system when the world is at peace, but it is a catastrophic liability the second a geopolitical shockwave hits. When diesel fuel spikes to $7, $8, or $10 a gallon because of a Middle Eastern ghost blockade, the trucks that supply your local supermarket stop running. The fertilizer needed for the American agricultural heartland becomes prohibitively expensive. We are talking about genuine systemic rationing. The politicians will stand at their podiums and blame corporate greed. They will blame price gouging. They will blame everyone but their own disastrous foreign policy and the fragile, over-optimized supply chains they allowed to be built. But blame will not put food on your table or gas in your car. Tell me in the comments what you are already seeing in your own hometown. Are you seeing the early signs of shrinkflation or quiet rationing? Are prices creeping up again despite what the official CPI numbers say? Give us a sitrep from your local area in the comments below, because we need to share this intelligence with each other. But the physical shortages are only the first tremor. The real earthquake hits the American banking sector. I want you to remember the regional bank failures of 2023, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic. That was just a dress rehearsal. If oil doubles in price overnight due to an unresolvable blockade, the Federal Reserve is caught in an inescapable fatal trap. If they try to stimulate the economy to prevent a devastating recession, inflation will break out of its cage and hit 15, maybe 20%. If they instead choose to aggressively hike interest rates to crush that inflation, the massive portfolios of government bonds held by every regional bank in America will collapse in value. The commercial real estate market, which is already a ticking time bomb, will detonate. We are talking about a systemic banking crisis where your deposits are legally reclassified as unsecured loans to failing institutions. The FDIC does not have the capital to bail out the entire system. They will be forced to print the difference, effectively bailing out the banks by quietly confiscating the purchasing power of your life savings. And here is the most chilling part of this entire projection. The endgame they are actively preparing behind closed doors. You know the old Washington adage, Never let a serious crisis go to waste. When the supply chains break and the regional banks falter, the federal government will step in not as a savior, but as a warden. This economic state of emergency will be the perfect, tailor-made excuse to roll out the final phase of their financial control grid, a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. They will pitch it to the panicked public as a matter of national security and economic convenience. They will tell you it's the only way to efficiently distribute emergency stimulus checks, manage fuel rationing, and secure your deposits. But you must understand what a programmable digital dollar actually is. It is the absolute death of financial privacy and individual autonomy. With a CBDC, unelected bureaucrats can dictate what you can buy, when you can buy it, and where you are allowed to travel. If they decide you have purchased too much gasoline this month, your transaction is simply declined at the pump. If they want to stimulate the economy, they can program your digital dollars to expire and disappear if you don't spend them within 30 days. It is the ultimate tool for behavioral engineering, masquerading as a financial rescue package. They want to trap you in a closed loop where every transaction is monitored, taxed, and subject to the political whims of the state. When the ghost blockade triggers a domestic financial meltdown, the rollout of programmable money will happen so fast, the terrified American public will blindly accept the handcuffs just to get their next government ration. This brings me to the most critical question I will ask you today, and I want your answer in the comments right now. When they declare the emergency and roll out the programmable digital dollar, will you accept it, or will you draw your line in the sand? Let me know down below. Let's expand on that, because you need to see the entire global chessboard. While Washington prepares to lock down the domestic economy with programmable money, the rest of the world is already heading for the exits. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have spent the last decade aggressively hoarding physical gold and building alternative payment systems to bypass the US dollar. Why? Because they saw this exact scenario coming. They watched the United States weaponize the SWIFT financial system, and they realized that holding dollar-denominated reserves was a catastrophic vulnerability. When the Strait of Hormuz effectively closes and the petrodollar fractures, these nations will not step in to save the American bond market. They will accelerate their dumping of U.S. treasuries, flooding the market with debt that nobody wants to buy. This foreign abandonment of the dollar will act as a terrifying multiplier on our domestic crisis. The government will be forced to become the buyer of last resort for its own unpayable debt, a process that historically ends in one inevitable outcome: hyperinflation. Let me bring this all the way home for you. We are staring down the barrel of a completely new era of warfare where the ultimate weapon of mass destruction is economic contagion. The scenario playing out in our Gulf projection is a terrifying preview of the profound fragility of the entire Western financial system. When energy transit is halted, agricultural production costs skyrocket. When production costs skyrocket, retail prices surge. The inflation we have seen recently will look like a nostalgic period of price stability compared to what is coming. The government cannot legislate oil tankers through a war zone. They cannot pass a stimulus bill to extinguish the fires at Jebel Ali. All they can do is print more currency to paper over the crisis, accelerating the death spiral of the dollar's purchasing power. So, where does this leave you? It leaves you with a choice. You cannot afford to be exposed to markets that inherently price in perfect global stability. Let me be perfectly clear. Perfect stability is dead. The era of blindly throwing your hard-earned wealth into index funds and assuming a guaranteed 7% annual return is over. You are navigating an active minefield blindfolded. You must take command of your own financial perimeter. You must strip the counterparty liability from your portfolio. Recognize that when the paper markets panic, when the digital screens flash red, and when the ghost blockade becomes undeniable reality, the only assets that will clear the smoke with their value not only intact, but fundamentally enhanced, are the ones you can hold in your physical hand. Paper contracts, ETFs, and digital promises will burn in the fires of inflation. Physical gold and physical silver have survived every geopolitical crisis, every currency collapse, and every empire's fall for 5,000 years. They carry zero counterparty risk. They cannot be hacked, They cannot be printed into oblivion by a panicked central bank, and their value is not dependent on the safe passage of an oil tanker through a contested strait. Do not be the collateral damage of a failed foreign policy and a reckless central banking system. The warning signs are flashing bright red. The adversaries have shown their hand. The ghost blockade is the blueprint for the next global crisis. Let me know in the comments what specific steps you are taking today to shield your portfolio. If this message gave you clarity, hit the share button and send it to someone who needs to hear the truth. Secure your wealth. Protect your family's future. Act accordingly and act now.